This is MCEA's first legislative webinar of 2023, which is a session that's been off to a roaring start. With new legislative leadership, things are really moving quickly at the Minnesota Capitol, and MCEA is up there in the mix to make sure that we're bringing forward your concerns about Minnesota's environment, making sure that it's protected. And today is a chance for you to get a feel for what's happening, both on the 100% clean energy bill, which is moving very quickly at the legislature, and we expect to come up in the Senate this week. So we've got Ellen Anderson, our climate program director, with us, as well as Andrea Lovell, our legislative director, and Jen Fuller, our policy advocate, to talk about other issues at the Capitol that are going to come throughout the session. My name is Aaron Clems. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at MCEA, and I'm happy to host this conversation. And we will be having a number of legislative webinars throughout the session. And by the end of this one, we'll have more details for the next conversation coming up in a couple of weeks about environmental justice in our healthy communities work. This conversation is fueled by you, by MCEA supporters, and thank you for your support that allows us to work in the courts, at the legislature, and in regulatory agencies to defend Minnesota's environment. If you haven't already become a member and a supporter of MCEA, please consider a contribution. Go to mncenter.org/donate to make a contribution to continue to fuel this work so we can have these kinds of conversations. As I said, this is the first in our legislative webinar series. We do archive all of our webinars on our YouTube channel and also on our website. So go to mncenter.org or our YouTube channel under Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. And you can see a recording of this webinar and share it with your friends if you think there's something that other folks need to see. And what we have planned today is a chance to hear from our legislative team. The first few weeks of the legislative session has been just going quickly. We have a real-time update on the 100% clean energy bill, probably the most significant environmental legislation to move through the Minnesota legislature since the 2008 Legacy Amendment. And we'll also have a chance to answer your questions. So again, put your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end of the hour. So our MCEA's legislative team is with us, and I'm going to start with Andrea Lovell. Andrea is our legislative director. She oversees MCEA's strategy at the legislature and ensures that it's aligned with the work that we do in all of our programs: climate, water, healthy communities, and Northeastern Minnesota. Andrea, could you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Andrea. I'm the legislative director here, like Aaron said. I've been at MCEA this is going to be my fourth session with MCEA. So I'm really excited about the exciting amount of work that is happening at the legislature already. And I oversee our legislative work with all of our program levels. So with the water program, the climate program, our healthy communities program, and the Northeast Minnesota program. So all of the legislative work that is done within those programs, I develop the strategy for and work with our team to pass legislation through committees and hopefully pass it into law.
Thank you, Andrea. And a lot to do this session for sure. Our special guest today is Ellen Anderson, MCEA's climate program director. She has a lot of work at the legislature focused on climate work, and particularly has a lot to say about the 100% clean energy bill. Ellen also served 18 years in the Minnesota Senate, where she was the architect and helped push through some of the legislation that precedes this 100% clean energy bill. Ellen, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Ellen Anderson, and it's been really a lot of fun being at MCEA and being able to go work on the 100% bill, because it does reminisce many of the things that I worked on about more than a decade ago in the legislature. And it's been really valuable for me to be able to have that time at the Capitol where I can benefit from the relationships that I've had at the legislature for many years, and a number of the people I serve with in the Senate are still there, which is great. And also that when it comes specifically to the 100% bill, what I've been able to bring to the table is the history. And, you know, about 2001 is when I started working on a renewable energy standard and trying to put requirements for renewable energy into our state laws. And it was considered a bit of a pipe dream back then. And then seeing the what's happened over time up till today is a transformational change. And I wanted people to understand that what we did is, with all the clean energy bills that we passed in prior years, we've actually found out that renewable energy can being included into the grid, and it's highly reliable. It's low cost and save billions of dollars for Minnesotans and reduced air pollution for all of us to breathe better. So we have some really great information that we've been sharing with testimony in the House and the Senate on this bill. So I'm looking forward to talking more about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ellen. And our last panelist is Dr. Jen Fuller. She's the newest member of MCEA's legislative team. She just joined us in December as our policy advocate. Jen, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. So yeah, I came to MCEA in December, so I've definitely been hitting the ground running. It's been a really exciting session. I recently finished up my PhD in environmental social science, where I wrote about the governance and visuality of urban solar power. And I come to MCEA with an environmental education background. I've worked at K-12 schools, colleges, museums, and parks, delivering environmental ed programming. And with MCEA, I'm tracking bills, meeting with legislators, conducting public outreach, and working with the climate team.
Well, welcome to MCEA, Jen, and we're really excited to have you on board. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more about ways that you can plug in, and Jen will have that section a little bit later in the presentation today. As I said, though, we're going to start with the 100% clean energy bill because I think it is accurate to say this is a momentous piece of legislation and one that is probably more significant than almost anything that's been done in the last decade. If passed, it will move Minnesota to 100% carbon-free electricity by the year 2040, as well as 80% carbon-free by 2030. And that's a lot of progress in a very short period of time, but it builds on the success that we already have. It passed the Minnesota House last week after 8 hours of debate. We expect a vote in the Minnesota Senate potentially this week, with Senate author Nick Frentz predicting that it will pass at a press conference last week. So as I said before, Ellen Anderson was a key architect of some of Minnesota's earlier renewable energy standards during her time in the Minnesota Senate. She testified in Senate committee last week in favor of the bill and was part of that press conference with bill authors before the House vote last week. So I'll start with Ellen. Why is the 100% bill so important to Minnesota reaching our climate goals, which go beyond just electricity generation, but start there?
Exactly. The 100% bill, as Aaron mentioned and explained, is really sets very aggressive targets for the electricity sector in Minnesota to decarbonize, to cut carbon out of it. And that is a huge step towards tackling the climate crisis that we live in. And as we've all experienced, climate change is happening now, and Minnesota, in fact, is seen as one of the fastest warming states in the nation. And we have a lot to lose because we live in a place that has so much beautiful outdoors and lakes and rivers and forests and wildlife, and so much is at stake in terms of the health of our people as well. And so this bill is a huge step forward because it's so aggressive, and as Aaron said, because it will get us to 100% clean electricity by 2040, and these are aggressive goals. And that means that anyone who generates power in the state of Minnesota is going to have to figure out how to do it in a way that is carbon free. So that is very important. And think about all the changes that will happen. We all use electricity every day, right? And we need it, we rely upon it. And now we're going to be able to have electricity that is based on clean renewable sources like wind, solar, battery storage, and some hydropower. And those are in the law that will be part of this new program that once it's passed by the Senate, which we expect it to do in the next couple of days. So then it will go right to the governor's desk and he says he will sign it. So this is very exciting and it's a huge step forward. As Aaron said, you know, we have to address climate change in all sectors of the economy. And some of our sectors are just not doing very well. They're going in the wrong direction. The electricity sector is actually reducing emissions, although it has a long ways to go to reduce all that pollution coming from fossil fuel usage. But we also need to take action on transportation, on agriculture, on industry, and on buildings, which are all increasing in their emissions. And the electrification of the future is an important way that we're going to solve the climate crisis. And so when we have clean, renewable energy-based electricity, then we can use that electricity to provide clean, renewable energy-based transportation and buildings that are healthier to live in because they're using electricity sources instead of clean electricity sources instead of heating, and burning fossil fuels in your home like most of us do with natural gas. And so all those sectors really need clean electricity for the bigger picture of other sectors of the economy to get to a zero carbon future.
Yeah, and breaking news just before we got on the air here was the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency released their biannual report looking at greenhouse gas emissions. And, a couple of years ago, the utility sector, electricity generation, was by far the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in Minnesota. At this point, it's now third behind transportation and behind agriculture and land use. And so we've already seen some significant progress in this way, but the 100% bill will drive that much more quickly. One big change is going to be not just the 100% eventual target in 2040, but a really aggressive reduction of 80% by 2030. Why is it important to reduce greenhouse gases so quickly during this decade? Why is it not okay just to set a goal for 2040 and an eventual phase out as opposed to working hard to reduce it as quickly as possible?
Well, we need to have reduced carbon emissions from all sectors of the economy and the electricity sector yesterday. We needed to do it a long time ago, and we've made some progress. But the scientists tell us, the leading scientists of the world are very clear that we have to cut emissions at least in half this decade. So we're talking just a few years from now, and we are not on track to get there. We're not on track as a state to meet our overall greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And so we have a long ways to go to cut our emissions dramatically. So again, the electricity sector will get us a long ways there, but it's not the only part of the equation to solve the climate crisis.
Sure. So, one feature of this bill that's been really present during the House debate, but also in some of the committee hearings, is that this bill is what they call technology agnostic. That's the phrase that Senator Nick Frentz uses to describe it, the author of the Senate bill. And that it doesn't really favor any particular carbon-free electricity sources, but that all of them count. And so previous renewable energy standards, it's been limited to wind and solar, whereas now this kind of includes other carbon-free technologies and other carbon-free electricity generation. So what kind of carbon-free electricity can we expect to develop after this passes? And what counts now that didn't count before?
Sure. So, yeah, the Clean Energy Standard Bill, as it's actually called, rather than the 100% bill, which we all like to call it that because it's going to get us to 100% clean electricity. That bill is going to rely on carbon-free sources only. And those are defined as I mentioned, wind energy, solar energy, and using battery storage to support that, as well as hydropower can also meet that. And geothermal can as well, if it's carbon-free, and other sources, hydrogen can even meet that if it's carbon-free and produced with a clean energy source. So those are the main areas that will be able to be counted towards this, these steps of 80% reduction, 90% reduction, then 100% reduction of renewable energy and renewable electricity. There's also the renewable energy standard, just to really confuse things a little bit. There's two different bills in this bill. And the one bill is about the clean electricity standard that I just described and what the resources are that could count in that, including, did I say nuclear power? I think I did.
Not yet, but yeah.
Oh, sorry, I forgot the nuclear power is considered clean electricity in the clean electricity 100% bill because it is not carbon emitting. And then there's another piece of the bill that is based on the renewable energy standard that was passed, that I passed, authored in 2007. And that has a series of definitions of what are renewable energy. And that standard for renewable energy specifically has to be increasing its production of renewable energy by 2035, 55% by 2035, I believe.
So for the renewable energy standard, technologies like wind and solar would count. For the carbon-free electricity standard, which is the eventual 2040 100% goal, other technologies including hydropower, nuclear, geothermal, and other non-carbon emitting sources could count.
Correct. So nuclear power can count towards the clean energy standard, but it cannot count to the renewable energy standard. So there's a lot of back and forth about knowing exactly what covers what in these two laws, but they both are intended toward the same result. But the renewable energy standard, we have to say, has some other definitions of what are renewables that are not, that are kind of, thought they were many years ago when we passed this bill, but there's things like biomass and waste to energy, things that are counting in that renewable energy standard law still. And I think that's a place that gives us room for improvement. And so we'll get another bill going on that later on.
And just to be clear about that, there's one waste to energy facility that is specifically carved out from that, which is the Hennepin, the HERC, the downtown waste burner. And that will no longer count as a renewable source under this law, if it's passed in its current form.
I think
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ellen.
I was just going to say one more thing that I haven't really mentioned is that, all the pollution that comes from greenhouse gas emissions and from other polluting sources tend to have in Minnesota a disproportionate impact on communities of color or low-income communities, tribal communities. And so we have a lot of work that needs to be done. And the bill, the 100% bill, does include a lot of measures that will help support equity more deeply into our clean energy laws, which is great. And as Erin mentioned, the HERC one will not be considered renewable energy anymore because it's in a community that is impacted severely by health impacts from all the pollution coming out of that incinerator in Minneapolis. And so we know that there's an effort to try to shut that plant down, but this bill doesn't specifically shut it down, but it says you can't count this as renewable energy and make money doing that anymore.
Yeah. Andrea, we're here. Go ahead.
I was just going to add really quick that I think one of the things that makes this bill really successful is the fact that it builds on an existing framework. So using the existing framework of the renewable energy credit system and then building on that to help us transition better to a clean energy standard is one of the really smart things about this bill. And I think that's what makes it really feasible and workable, and why there was support from utilities in committee on hearings in this bill, because it is a very workable solution given that it exists on an existing framework that's already in statute.
And can I add to that real briefly? So MCEA, myself and our other attorneys and experts in our organization were very involved in helping to draft the legislation and, kind of make fixes to some of the troubling or difficult sections of the bill. And so we were very involved in helping the authors of the bill, Representative Long and Senator Frentz, in trying to help as much as we could to make this a really great piece of legislation. So we're very proud to have been helpful in that process.
So, Andrea, we were hearing earlier that it sounds like this bill is likely to pass, but is there anything we're hearing nowadays about when we are likely to hear this bill in front of the Senate and what the governor will likely do if it passes the Senate floor?
Yeah, so there's a lot of energy around this at the Capitol. You can feel it whenever there's a hearing. There's a lot of people in the room. There's a lot of activity in the rotunda. There's people wearing T-shirts and holding signs. And legislators see that, and they know that this is something that Minnesotans want. They're hearing about it from their legislators, and they're telling us that they're hearing about it. So one of the things that I'm hearing and gathering from all of that is that they are wanting to pass this, and that there's the momentum to do it in both bodies. We're hearing some rumors that it will be heard in the Senate floor sometime this week. Given schedules at the Senate, maybe Thursday, maybe. If we're lucky, we can get it to the governor's desk soon after that and have it signed into law as soon as possible. We're hearing that things are going to continue moving quickly with this bill, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of hesitation in it being able to pass.
Yeah. So Jen, how can people who want to send a message of support to their legislator take action?
Yeah, so we have action alerts on our website, and I'll go through some of our legislative resources later in the webinar. And also just feel free to call them up. They love hearing from their constituents, and even if your legislator, you don't think they support the 100% bill, definitely call them and ask them to change their mind and tell them why.
It's really good advice. And also, like, if you want to do it the really easy way, in the chat, there is a link to our 100% action alert, and it will link you by email to your legislator and Governor Walz. But I think Jen's exactly right. Calling your legislator is the best way. I mean, I think those kinds of personal contacts are something that legislators always tell us that they really value, and they want to hear from you. So you should give them a call and talk to them directly. But if you wanted to send an email, make it easy, you can use our link that's in the chat to do that. We'll come back a little bit later to some of the topics about other climate action that's going to happen in the legislature, because I think that'll be a natural outgrowth of some of our other conversation. But thank you so much for joining us today, Ellen, and we'll come back to you in a little bit to talk more about some other additional climate action in the legislature. I want to shift a little bit to more broad questions involving other programs at MCEA as well, because we have a broad legislative agenda that comes from the work of all of our programs on climate, on water, Northeastern Minnesota, and healthy communities and environmental justice. And in previous sessions, MCEA has really focused on a limited number of bills because, quite frankly, there wasn't a lot moving at the legislature over the last couple of sessions, with the impasse between the House and the Senate being controlled by different parties. This time, there seems to be a lot moving, and so there's a lot more on the agenda in terms of bills that we're pushing for. And so I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit with Andrea about some of these issues. So Andrea, what are some of the issues that were stuck in previous sessions that we can expect to see progress on in 2023 beyond the 100% bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you've really captured both the great parts of the change in the legislature and the difficult parts, because, you know, with having bodies in agreement on a lot of the big things, there's a lot of things moving into the spotlight. So we're hearing really fast movement, not only on environmental issues, but everything is competing for attention. We just passed through the PRO Act on the Senate side, which is codifying abortion rights and reproductive rights. There's been a lot of movement on paid family leave and banning conversion therapy and other gender affirming care. And we're expecting a lot of legislation to come through on gun laws as well. And so there's just a lot of things competing for the spotlight, and environment is part of that. The governor has made really clear, and so have other legislators, that climate and environment is a priority. And the fact that the 100% bill is one of the first to get through both bodies is really strong evidence of that. We're also seeing a lot of reflection in the governor's budget that there's a lot of strong priorities on climate and the environment, which is refreshing and hopeful, and also means there's a lot of work to do. And so there's a lot of things that we've been working on that have been stuck on environment and climate wise that are moving, 100% bill being one of them. That bill has been around the legislature for the better part of a decade, and we're finally moving it through. We're seeing a lot of bills like that have been discussed at the legislature and passed through one or either or bodies, but not both, that we are really moving on to get it done this session. So I have issues like the SALT and limited liability waiver bill that we were working on last session that we had a webinar specifically on. We're really hopeful with bipartisan authorship from both the House and the Senate that this is really the time for that bill, and that's really exciting. There's also some more movement on the Environment Natural Resources Trust Fund appropriations and reauthorization that we are very hopeful will be unstuck this session. And of course, other climate and resiliency program bills that will be coming down the pike too. And then, of course, PFAS, which we also had a webinar on last session that passed through a lot of different committees in the House and had a lot of movement and didn't cross the finish line on the House last session. There's actually going to be a hearing today on 3 PFAS bills in the Environment Natural Resources Committee at 3 o'clock today, where MCEA will be present in testifying in support of those bills.
Yes, I mean, a lot of the commentary, you hear on the news and elsewhere, it's about how fast everything is moving. And I started by talking about that too, with bills coming up to the floor for debate quickly and vote far earlier than in previous sessions. In a lot of previous sessions, it's been kind of a wait and see game, and then everything happens at the very, very end of the session. So has that been your experience so far, that things are moving more quickly? And what do you expect for the rest of the session?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, things are moving fast. It feels different. It is a definite different energy in the building. I think there's a lot of things that contribute to that. I don't think it's just the fact that there is just one party controlling all 3 bodies. I think there's a lot to it. 38% of the House is brand new. We have a lot of new members of the legislature that are motivated and high energy and ready to do the work. And that really helps a lot to have some really motivated legislators doing all of this important work. The revisor's office told us that there's a record number of bills that were introduced at the start of session this year, which means that legislators are just turning out all of these bills and really making strong movement on it. It's also worth noting that this is the first legislative session that we've been fully back in person since the pandemic. And that has shifted a lot of the energy too. And so I think what we're seeing at the legislature is just a big culmination of different factors that make things feel a lot more energetic and fast-paced. In reality, Go ahead.
I was just going to add one thing to it, which is in addition to the 38% new this session, I think another figure that I heard that was really interesting was that more than half of both the House and the Senate have not been there for a fully in-person legislative session, which last occurred in 2019.
Yeah. It's really crazy to think about. There's so many new legislators that you walk in and they go, oh, I'm not used to having people in my office. This is weird. Because they've never had visitors in their office before, because the Capitol buildings were closed last session and the session before. And so it's a really different time, and that energy is just intoxicating. It makes things feel really energetic. I would also note at the same time, though, that that the fact that there's a lot of energy and motivation to get things done, I wouldn't say that it feels like it's going too fast, because most of the bills that are being heard right now that are going through committee and to the House floor have been around for the better part of a decade or longer. A lot of these bills have already passed the House body or the Senate body previously. And so we're just getting things checked off the to-do list that have been on the to-do list for a very, very long time. And so there's a lot of rhetoric coming around that you'll hear that the legislature is moving at lightning speed and things are going way too fast and they're not going to enough committees, when in fact these have been discussed and negotiated over and over and over again, and we're finally getting it through. I really liked what Speaker Hortman said in her press release for the 100% bill, that the March deadline, the first deadline, is supposed to be the halfway point. So she wants half the work done by the halfway point. And there's a lot of legislators feel the same way, that they want more to be done by the time we get to the halfway point, instead of waiting for a big push at the very end.
Yeah, just to add one detail on top of that is that, so some of the stuff that's being done in the first weeks of the legislature has been cleanup from the failure of the end of the last one, particularly bills like the DNR's lands bills, for example, which allows them to fix the boundaries on state parks, or the appropriations from the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund that were already approved by and recommended by the Legislative Commission on Minnesota Resources that makes those recommendations, are now moving through, despite they should have been done last session. And so some of the action you're seeing early is just trying to catch up for what didn't get done at the end of the last session too. What are some of the bills that MCEA is pushing for this session, and how do they relate to our legal and regulatory work? I think that's one of the things that's interesting about MCEA's perspective on legislative work, is that oftentimes it's connected to sometimes litigation that we're involved in, sometimes regulatory work that we're doing. So what are some of the bills that we're working on this session?
Yeah, so I'll leave Ellen to talk a little bit about some of the climate stuff in a little bit, but I'll talk a little bit about some of the legislation that's moving in the other 3 programs. So in our water program, we're working on ways to further protect public waters. We are supporting a lot of peatland conservation that has been noted in the governor's budget, as well as trying to make sure that all that money goes into the right place by having the right statutes in place. So a lot of the work that we're doing in the water program is affirming some of our court cases that we've won, like in Limbo Creek, and making sure that every public water is protected as a public water. So we're working on some bill language to ensure that we have protections for all public waters. And also we're working on some transparency measures for water permits as well. So ways that the public can better know about what is happening regarding the waterways in their area. And find that information readily available. So we think that all of these are really important parts of the process, and that's a big focus of MCEA, is focusing on the process of how things work and ensuring that democracy is in action when protecting our environment. And then, of course, with the Northeast Minnesota program, we are trying to break the barrier of talking about mining at the legislature. There has been kind of a shroud of silence in the last several years, and even talking about how to better our mining regulation in the state and things to improve on. We're still operating on, what was the year that we had the mining regulation, Aaron? What year are we operating on?
1993.
1993. That's the mining regulation year that we're operating on, and there's been a lot of changes since 1993. So we think it's worthwhile to have a conversation about how we can improve our mining standards in Minnesota, so that we can actually say that we have the best standards in the state, or in the world, right? We want to be able to say that that's true. And so we are working on ways to break that conversation. We published an op-ed with our Chief Equity and Partnership Officer, Eric Eady, about Glencore, which, if you haven't seen, it's a really stunning op-ed that we've shared with legislators, and hope to have a conversation about what does happen with mining in Africa, and what do those companies look like, and what do they do, and why on earth would we invite them into Minnesota? So lots of really good questions that we're wanting to explore as part of that program. And we're also introducing hopefully a bill that would require a 10-year renewal process for mining permits, which right now they don't have. So we're working on a few things there regarding mining. There's other mining bills that are happening at the legislature that we also support, like Prove It First, and other initiatives that other organizations are working on that we would support. In the Healthy Communities program, there's a lot of really fast movement on some things. We're working on an initiative to help the Hmong American Farming Association. That, if you don't know anything about their farm, it's really cool. It's in Dakota County, and it supports a lot of small BIPOC-owned farming businesses that participate in CSAs and farm-to-school programs, and they do a lot of sustainable agricultural practices that are really good for the land and for the waterways nearby. So one of the things that we're working on is protecting their lands from some projects that are being proposed that would impact their land. And so there's a lot of movement on that bill, and we'll talk more about that at the next webinar. Little teaser for that. And then we're also working on cumulative impacts, which if you've been paying attention to MCEA's work, you know that we've been involved in this for a very long time. The cumulative impacts bill would essentially require the MPCA to do a cumulative impacts analysis before issuing a permit. And if that facility that's requesting the permit would add additional pollution to an already overburdened area, they would have to deny that permit. And so there's a lot of great movement on that for our areas that are already identified as EJ or environmental justice areas, places that are already overburdened with pollution. And that's another thing that we'll talk about more at the next webinar.
Yeah, and that one was included, a version of that bill is included in the governor's budget, which is a really big step forward, I think, for the governor and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to be engaged in that conversation. So we're really glad for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really great being part of the Frontline Community Protection Coalition. They've been doing some really amazing work. They've been working with House author, Senate author, as well as the PCA to try and make the best law absolutely possible. And the MPCA is committed to putting money towards making that happen. And so I'm really hopeful that we can get something done on that this session.
Yeah. Hey, one last question, this one's for Ellen, are there other climate initiatives that we can expect to follow up after the 100% bill is debated on the Senate floor?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's always a lot more to be done. And so there will be a number of bills. I'll start with the Next Generation Climate Act is a bill that we instigated a couple of years ago and worked with Representative Acom and Senator McEwen on. And the idea of that is to update the laws that we passed back in 2007 that set our greenhouse gas reduction targets for the state. And they are woefully behind they do not meet current science. And so the bills that we're talking about would update the science so that we'd get to that, what the scientists of the world are saying we need to do more directly, as I mentioned before. And we'd also require that as we implement our efforts to cut emissions from all different sectors of the economy beyond electricity, we need to do it in a way that honors equitable solutions and provides benefits for those in communities most negatively impacted by fossil fuel pollution, and also put some more requirements, more teeth in to the law to make sure that our state agencies are doing everything they possibly can to ensure that our state moves forward and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. There's a number of financially related, there's lots of pots of money floating around, and a number of them could affect climate. So the governor's budget certainly has provisions in it that would help with resiliency and other kinds of protection on climate. And the Inflation Reduction Act bills, it's like, a pot of gold for renewable energy, because the Inflation Reduction Act basically would cut the cost of wind and solar and battery storage by about 30%. So there's a big sale underway for wind and solar that have already become the cheapest source of energy, and now they're going to be even lower cost. And so the state has an opportunity to access those funds. A couple others real quick. Solar on schools has been a very popular piece of legislation, and that is very likely we'll get more funding for that. And electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging stations, and hopefully incentives for electric vehicles so that people can afford them more easily. And then I will add one more idea that is floating around at MCEA, and that is to update some of the laws of the Public Utilities Commission, which is the regulator of all things electricity and gas. And we spend a lot of our time working at the Public Utilities Commission to make sure we get good outcomes with our utility companies. And we want to make sure that the laws are updated and require that the PUC, when they have the utilities come in for their planning meetings that they have a plan to decarbonize and to get to a zero emission, or excuse me, to a carbon-free future. So that's another idea that we have. And there's many more, but these are some of the key ones that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it's a lot happening and a lot to do. And our last topic, before we go to questions and answers, I wanted to turn to Jen, our policy advocate, who's been working on our website and some of our web tools to help connect you and what you want to talk about to your legislators to resources that'll help you do so in an intelligent and informed way. And I wanted to turn it over to Jen for a minute, just to ask, first of all, you're new at MCEA, and we talked a little bit about your background in environmental policy. What's your approach to connecting people to policy action when you're doing this work?
Sure. So I like to start simple and have educational materials free to the public. Everybody's passionate about something, so it's about leveraging that passion into thoughtful engagement with the policy process, and again, whether through letter writing, collective action, and beyond.
So what's the most effective way to talk to your legislator about something that you care about, a bill or an idea that you want to see happen?
Yeah, so again, I think personalized letters and calls are really impactful. Lawmakers, they prioritize their constituents. So they really want to hear from you and understand how a proposed bill or change would impact your everyday life. I would suggest focusing on one topic, like per communication, rather than listing like a laundry list of things you want to see in a letter. I find that a little more effective. And then, remember to keep it cordial. Something else we like to remind folks is thank your legislators as well for positions they take that you like. They don't as often hear from people who are thankful of them. They hear from folks who want to see change, and so they really appreciate that, and they'll write us back and say, wow, it's been a while since someone's actually thanked me for my vote. So yeah, definitely take that into account.
So you've been doing a little bit of work on our website and some of the web tools, and I'm wondering if you could share with our supporters and viewers where they can find more information on our website. Yeah,
definitely. So I will go ahead and share my screen really quick. So are we seeing the screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So here's our main landing page, so mncenter.org. You're going to want to go to How We Win. You can see our legal battles and shaping policies, the second one. So we're going to scroll down a little bit to find our bill tracker and our fact sheets. So let me just really quick show what our bill tracker looks like. Again, there's a ton of stuff coming down the pike. We'll continue to update this as session moves on. But let's just go ahead and look at our 100% clean energy standard example. So we have an opportunity for you to actually read the bill. Very briefly, it brings you to the legislature's website. And then right here, current bill text. I won't go through this, but let's see if I can show. So you can just read the bill there. And then in this particular case, we gave testimony in both the House and the Senate. So we have available for you, I won't play this, but you can watch our testimony online. You can read our testimony. And as mentioned, you can take action. So this will pop up a link to tell your legislators what you think, how you support 100%. You can type in your street address. It will auto-populate your decision makers for you. And here's a letter sample, and you can feel free to personalize that and send it along. And yeah, we have other links to like partners and things like that. And you can kind of scroll through that as you wish. I want to point out one more thing on the Learn More. And that's our fact sheets. So you can view our well-sourced fact sheets. And yeah, lots of information there. And you can always contact us if you want more info about a particular bill or a particular topic. So go ahead and stop sharing. I want to stop it, but it paused it. Did it pause? It didn't pause. Okay, well. Sorry about that. Oh Lord. Okay.
You should be able to. Oh, At the
Okay.
top, there you go.
Someone did it for me. Thank you.
I think our magic back end manager, Adam Reinhardt, did that for us. So thank you, Adam. So besides the website, what are some other ways that folks can get involved or learn more about MCA at the legislature this session, Jen?
Yeah, definitely. So, well, our next webinar is going to be February 14th. And again, we'll focus on healthy communities. We'll have other webinars roll out as the session does. We're hoping to plan a Capitol Citizen Lobbying Day. So you would come meet us at the Capitol. We'll give you a rundown of what we're working on and then give you tips on how to talk to your legislators and send you off to the Senate and House of Reps buildings to actually talk to them. Or we would also invite you to sit in on a committee meeting or a floor session and observe the process in real time.
Yeah, I mean, and then that's a really good way of putting it. Like if you're thinking about coming up to the Capitol and you just want to connect with us, please let us know, and we would love to meet you somewhere or to give you a tour. We want to connect people as much as we possibly can with how to be involved in the legislative process. So thank you for all the information there, Jen. That's really appreciated. Andrea and Ellen, do you have anything you want to add here, or does that cover what you would say? What, especially particularly advice about talking to legislators? And Ellen, as a previous state senator, you might have some ideas about this.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate the tips that you've given already. As a former legislator, I was kind of shocked when I first was elected years and years ago, and how I had lots of lobbyists, paid lobbyists that would come to my office every day and ask for meetings, and it took a lot of work to actually get it set up so that my constituents would feel welcome to come. And I had to work really hard at that. This was long before we had the social media we have now. So it's so much easier now. It's easy to connect. And I think legislators want to hear from their constituents. I think you've already said it, and I just want to reinforce that. And if there's an issue that you and members in your community really care about, you can call them and ask them to have a meeting with them as well. And that will happen if it's, humanly possible. They'll do as much as they can to respond to constituents in particular. So great advice. And yeah, make sure you thank them when they do good things, and then let them know if there's things you don't like. That's okay too. That's part of democracy.
Yeah.
I have two very, very short things. One is just remember that your legislator is a regular person. Like they're just people just like you and I. I know it can be really intimidating to talk to somebody who is an elected official, but they are just regular folks like you and I. Don't be nervous about contacting them. They want to hear from you. And then the second thing is I'm seeing a lot of the Q&A questions about things about the bill. You can ask your legislator those kind of things too. They will respond to you if you have some concerns or some questions about a bill. They get those kind of inquiries, and they're used to responding to them. So I would encourage you all to contact your legislator about questions too.
I will note that there's only 1 or 2 times that I've contacted my legislator that I haven't heard back from them.
Yeah, and one more thing. I mean, as a legislator, your job is to provide information to your constituents as well. So if they, people want to know, what is this bill about? What is it? How does it work? That is, that's a really important part. And it might be their assistant that helps you with that, but that is really valuable to get that information.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn to some questions. We've got about 10 minutes left, and there's a ton of questions in the chat that are really smart and excellent. I don't think we're going to get to all of them. We'll do our best. I'm going to try to group together a few of the related ones, and I'm going to start with the 100% bill because there's a lot of interest and questions about that. Both Tim and Lawrence asked questions about the one thing was the off-ramps that are in this bill. I mean, you hear that an awful lot in committee where there is a process set up where the Public Utilities Commission, as they're approaching some of these goals, could say to a utility that asked for it, you have extra time to meet this goal, or give them some other way of meeting it. And there's also another question, which is how hard is it going to be to reach these goals? And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, Ellen. We'll start with you.
Yeah, and without just focusing on history, I will say a little bit about that, sort of how it all started in 2007 with the 25% renewable energy standard. That was the first time we put in those sort of, what do you call them, allowing sort of an off-ramp if things don't work, because people were skeptical. Can you do this? Can we really, back then we were asking, could we really meet 25% renewables into our grid? And now we have the same issue. And so there are skeptics out there, even though we've really proven that we can do this. And so the off-ramps are really put in place to say that, okay, if you're right, if the skeptics are right, and that it's too difficult, technologically difficult, too expensive, whatever the issues may be, they can go to the Public Utilities Commission and ask for some relief from that. You know, like you said, Erin, it could be, I'll tell you what, they've never used these before. In our law that passed the first time with off-ramps, they were never used. And so my prediction is they will never use them this time either, because the utilities are really good at following the law and, you know, seeing this is the trajectory that we're on. And so we have to plan for it. They're really good at planning. So, but they're there just in case there's something goes wrong. So that will be something that the Public Utilities Commission will make decisions about, and whether they're valid requests or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Answer?
and another question on the 100% bill from Stephanie Hemphill, who, wow, big fan of Stephanie Hemphill. She's done incredible journalistic work throughout her career. And she asked the question that I think is a lot of folks are wondering about, which is two things about the 100% bill. One is that it changed the classification of large hydropower to renewable. And it also has a provision that relates to the Nemaji Trail Energy Center, which is a gas power plant proposed in Superior, Wisconsin. And she asks why the change in the hydro, and also why the bill exempts the NTEC proposal. And just to be really clear, I don't think it does exempt the proposal from all regulation by the Public Utilities Commission. It exempts it from a single decision that's coming up. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about both of those, Ellen.
Yeah, those are great questions, Stephanie. And a lot of people are curious about them. And so, you know, the Nemaji Trail one, this is a proposed gas plant that the Minnesota Power Utility would like to be co-owner with building in Superior, Wisconsin. And it's gone through many, many years of Public Utilities Commission and courts and blah, blah, blah. And so it's still, there is a provision in the bill that says when the Minnesota Power goes back to the PUC, the next step that they would have to take would be to change their agreement, their contract agreement. It's called a affiliated interest agreement, and to change it, because they've now gone from saying that they want to build this whole plant and own it themselves. Now they're saying that they only want to own 20% of it, so they have to change their agreement. And that's the part that was exempted from the provision in the 100% bill. And so once they change that, they are going to be required to follow the 100% bill like any other utility, starting with the 80% requirement by 2030. So they will be fully having to comply with the 100% bill. And sorry, what was the other question?
The hydropower, because I think that there's a change in how we talk about hydropower in Minnesota law.
Yeah, and so hydro is interesting because, you know, we've had hydropower for a long time, serving a number of our utilities. There is a lot of concern in some parts of Indigenous communities in Manitoba, where most of the hydro comes from, about whether it's been harmful to communities. And we also, back in 2007, when we put the law in place about hydro, we limited it to small hydro projects, because we didn't want big hydro to come in and take over all the renewable energy. Then we would never have built our wind and solar industry in the state of Minnesota. And so that, but the upshot of this is that when you pass a bill like this is a complex bill that affects lots and lots of people. And we have two authors of the bill that have done a fantastic job of working with stakeholders. And that means they have to talk to people all over the state and people with all different opinions about this. And so sometimes, compromises have to be made to get the bill passed. And so I would say the hydro one was requested by some utilities, and after all these years, we know that hydropower is a zero emissions resource. And so it's now limited to existing hydro plants, as I believe in the bill. So it's a slight change. And, and it's done to help find that compromise that's needed to get this bill passed for the key parts of the bill to get passed. That's what really matters, is those targets.
Yeah, I'd like to get on other topics too, but just one more question was addressed about nuclear in the bill. And of course, Minnesota has 2 large nuclear plants that have operated since the 1970s at Monticello and Prairie Island. There was a lot of discussion on the floor of the House, particularly about the nuclear moratorium. But just so I'm getting this right, the nuclear changes in the bill do not allow for new nuclear plants to be built, but simply allow you to recognize that the nuclear power that is already being produced and being used in Minnesota is carbon free. Is that right?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about PFAS because it's coming up at the Capitol today. One person asked, why can't we get PFAS out of our receipts? And I think that's one of the things that's really interesting is how pervasive these chemicals are. And I'm wondering, Andrew, if you could talk a little bit about what bills are on tap at the legislature today and throughout the session about perfluorochemicals, those forever chemicals that are contaminating our water.
Yeah, always happy to talk about PFAS. Like I always say, this is the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night, to be perfectly honest. And the bills that are being heard today, there's one that would ban the use of PFAS in juvenile products. So things like cribs and mattresses and children's toys and things like that. And there's also one that would ban it in the use of firefighting foam, which is one of the primary ways that it gets into our groundwater sources. So you're seeing some cities in Minnesota that are suffering the consequences, both in their water facilities, as well as in the health of their citizens regarding PFAS. And also the firefighters' health. That's a really big part of it too. They have a lot more intense exposure and they have a lot more increased health risks if they're using firefighting foam that contains PFAS. And then the other one is a bill that we've written a pretty good testimony on that will be posted hopefully soon. And that is regarding information disclosure. So what this bill does is it requires that any intentionally added PFAS be disclosed to the commissioner, the MCEA, and they can decide what to do with that information. So the reason intentionally added is on there is because if you are, say, a small business owner and you're using a varnish to make some kind of woodworking thing, and you don't see that there's any kind of label on the varnish that says that there's PFAS in it, you as the small business owner who made that piece of furniture are not liable because you didn't intentionally add that. The ownership of the responsibility would be on the person who created the varnish, because then they intentionally add the PFAS. So that's why that language is in there. It's a question that gets asked a lot. So tune into the hearing if you want. It is at 3 o'clock today. You can see it on YouTube. If you just go to YouTube and you Google Minnesota Legislature House, you'll be able to find it on a live channel and also find a recording of it there.
Yeah, and thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's a good pivot to the very end of this. And I apologize. I know there's so many questions in the chat that we did not get to. I tried to combine as many as we could, but I apologize if we didn't get to your question, and we'll do our best to address it. Feel free to email us and let us know if we can answer a question for you. We're happy to do it that way as well. I'm really glad that you mentioned 2 things. One is our next legislative webinar, which is going to be held on February 14th. And you can already RSVP for that webinar. It will be focused on our Healthy Communities program and our environmental justice legislative work. So questions about the cumulative impacts bill, I saw some in chat. I apologize we didn't get to it. The East Phillips Neighborhood Institute's proposal for an urban farm and how that relates to cumulative impacts. We'll do our best to really dive deep into that in a couple of weeks. So please register for our February 14th webinar. It'll be on the same day of the week, Tuesday at noon. And it's as always free to attend, and we welcome everybody to come. One of the resources that we haven't talked about yet is, I'll just make really clear, our social media. So on Twitter particularly, we do our very best to live connect people to debates that are happening at the legislature and when MCEA is testifying. If you're a Twitter user, you can find that information there. You can also go on our Facebook page as well, but we do our best to share a lot of this legislative information through our social media channels, as well as our website. And of course, all those resources that Jen was showing you earlier on our website, mncenter.org, go to How We Win and click on Shaping Policy. And that will allow you to connect with your legislators, learn more about what's being proposed in the legislature and how you can get involved. One last thing, thank you so much for joining us. It takes a lot out of your day and we appreciate you spending your lunch hour with us. And also thank you for supporting this work. We really genuinely can't do it without your support. So please, if you're so moved, please make a contribution to our work at mncenter.org/donate. Otherwise, on behalf of Andrea and Ellen and Jen and myself, I want to thank you all for being here. We look forward to seeing you up at the Capitol and around town, and we appreciate your support. So thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you all.